Ahora sí.
Okay, you can see it well now, right? Yes, we can.
Perfecto.
Okay, so
Yo soy Alejandro Medina.
my name is Alejandro
Soy
Medina,
ingeniero
and I'm an
electrónico.
engineer in interoperability at Sense. And today we're going to be looking at track
En
2.
específico, vamos a ver
More in particular, we're going to
el paso
be
A, que es el
seeing
inicio.
track 2A.
Y la idea de esto es que
And the idea
es similar
is
a
for
como
you
lo
to
vimos
understand that this is similar
el año pasado o
to
el
what
año
we
anterior.
saw last year
Hay
or
unos
previous
cambios
years. There are
en las
some
estructuras
changes
que es
in the
necesario que los
structure. We're
instrumentos
going to be checking that
puedan interactuar
here.
con sus
And we
conceptos.
will also see some examples together with
Sergio a
Sergio
continuación y
of
nos va a
the
explicar
process
esta nueva
and
estructura.
how to follow the new structure.
Ya, recordando siempre que
Okay,
la
so let us
idea
remember
del track 2 es poder generar
that the idea in track
registro,
2
en este caso
is
basándose en
to
una
have a
inmunización para
record
certificar
based on an
esta
immunization
página
record, that is to say, a digital
pueda
certificate, and that this
avanzar
digital certificate
entre
can
diferentes países o aplicaciones
go
y poder
between
ser
different
probado de
countries and
manera
can also be
acompañante y
validated in
generando
different places with
que fueron
the
probados
same key that
científicamente.
you have created.
Ya, lo que vamos a ver ahora va a ser
So what we're going to
básicamente
be
lo que es
looking
el
at today
ICVP.
is the
Esta es una
implementation guide,
implementación guide que es
ICVP.
la misma
I always have to
implementación
say
del
this. This is the
ICVP
same
para
one from
servicios
last
infraestructura,
year.
pero en sí los
It
links
has some
aparecen tanto
additions, but the
como
links should also
como
work
en los anteriores.
as they did in
Ya,
previous years.
uno de los cambios son la
One
lista
of
de
the changes
certificabilidad
is the
de cada país.
pre-qualified vaccination list from
También lo vamos a ver
WHO.
ahora, vamos a ver
And
algunas de
we're
las
going to be looking at that. We're
especificaciones
going to see how to
ISSB
create and to store that IPS
o análisis de procesos de información
ICVP,
particular.
and obviously the analysis of that
Similar
resource, which is
al del
similar to the one from the
obviamente
previous
cambian la
Conectaton.
estructura y cambian
Since the structure
lo
changes and since
necesario
some
para la
codes
adopción
do change, it's important to
son
pay
de este
attention
tipo de ediciones.
on those
Ya,
kind of additions.
¿cómo generar un certificado
How
o
to
cómo hacer
create a
el
certificate from an IPS.
cuestionario? Estas son
The
elementos
questionnaire, these are internal elements
que se utilizan
that
durante este
are
proceso. Muchos
used as part of the
probablemente
process.
algunos de ustedes
And probably
utilizan directamente
many
uno
of
de los
you will
escalafones
not
más rápidos
have,
en este proceso.
will not directly see this, but it's important for
Ya
you
los
to
modelos
understand
lógicos,
how these
comienzo
applications
y
work.
finalizamos con
Logic methods,
ejemplos
signature and validation, and we will
de las
end with some
transacciones
examples
ICVP para
and the transaction ITI
desarrollar
65. Sergio
alguna
will address
implementación y
all of
elementos
that, and the
importantes
idea is for us to
a
be able
nivel
to
nacional para
see
que
how
sea
this works with the national node, the
ya,
Docker, and how
seguimos
to run the
ya
process.
sigue
So,
siendo el mismo
implementation guide, it's the same link,
si es que
the
alguien se quiere
same one
conectar
as
después del
before.
evento
You can see it on the screen. You can scan
recordando
the QR code. Smart ICPV. This is the latest version.
debería pasar esta versión después de hacer parte de su
So
implementación
you should,
que es un proceso
this
que
should
estamos
be the
iniciando.
updated one.
Vamos a hacer pruebas sobre
We're
él
going to
y
run tests
probablemente
and
se va a recabar información acerca de cuáles
probably
son los
we
pros y
will
contras
collect information on the
de
use,
hacer
the
una
good things, the bad
implementación para
things,
poder
and that will
tener
be
líneas de
helpful in order
implementación
for us to
y poder generar
make
finalmente
the implementation guides more robust so that we can have
un nuevo release. ¿Ya?
a new release
La
version.
información general
So the general
de esta
information
guía de
of
implementación
this
está basado
implementation
en
guide
este modelo.
is based
Sí. En este modelo,
on
modelo
this
nacional de certificado de
international
vacunación,
certificate,
para
vaccination
eso y para poder
certificate.
emular este
And for this,
proceso
and in order
o
to
cambiar
emulate the process,
se utilizan ciertos modelos
we
lógicos
always use a
o
certain
lógicos
logic models, which are described
cuestionarios
in the
que van
guide.
a servir de
A
base para hacer
questionnaire, which is the basis for us
disponible.
to make these kinds of
Todos estos
transformations,
insumos
and it's
finalmente
already
se
available.
utilizan
And all of this information is used
para poder generar finalmente ese
in
certificado.
order
¿Ya?
to
Mucho del
create
trabajo
the
de
certificate.
transformación entre estos elementos son los que permiten
Transformation from
llevar
text to elements
a este certificado
allow us to create these certificate,
por internet.
and it's then translated
Esta
into
es
the
la idea
QR code,
finalmente.
following the right structure and
Ya,
following the
hay
right
perfil
pathway to get
importante
there.
que es la representación
There
del
are
IPS
important profiles,
según debe
which
ser.
is the
Ya
representation in
probamos
the IPS of a DVC by using
algunas
the
precalificaciones
pre-qualified WHO
eh, vamos a hacer
vaccination
traducir esa base de datos
database,
a
and then how we
códigos
can
utilizables
translate
para
that
la
into the
responsabilidad.
codes that are used by the fire
Ya, y la
resources.
idea es que, bueno,
And then
el
the
modelo
idea is that
es
this
simple,
model,
sirve para la
as a
representación
subset, is helpful
de
for
certificados
representing this international vaccination certificate by using the same database with the only difference that it's a small set related to the specific ICVP elements. Okay, so the pre-qualified WHO vaccination list, there's a lot of documentation on this, but it's still important for you to understand what it is. These are vaccinations that have gone through very exhaustive assessments. The countries that are part of the WHO have tested and have sampled it, and they can also buy them, and they have been pre-qualified. So when a vaccination meets all the standards from the WHO, it's part of the pre-qualified WHO list, and therefore the creator of the vaccination is also a part of this repository or this list of vaccination, which immediately says that we don't have to fill out certain amount of information that in the past we had to include as part of the IPS. In fact, several pieces of information are already emitted. So we could say that thanks to this list, this is simplified. The list is available, you can see it, and obviously we need to do the translation, and the WHO has done the translation and has transformed it into a value set. Uh, and it's a code system and a value set so that it can be referenced from several systems. In this particular case, for our IPS and also for the vaccination certificate. So currently, the codes are seen in this format. You can see them there. And these codes should change then to a final code. But in the meantime, these are the codes that will have to be used. It's the same list. It's available in the same link that you can see there at the bottom of the screen. You can see all the vaccinations in this pre-qualified list. And this is the form that will have to be used until we receive any further guidelines. And we're also going to be a part of this whole maturity process. Obviously, the guides are part of the smart product catalog. Vaccinations are presented, the types of vaccinations, and also the products, the pre-qualified vaccinations, and there are additional elements that could be helpful for other purposes that are not part of what we're going to be doing. So, understanding then, at least conceptually, that these codes will change, part of the process that you will have to carry out in this stage, and I'm talking about track 2A, is to create and store an IPS ICVP. You may recall that you did that through the applications. And the difference now is that we're going to have to do the same process, but changing the codes and updating the structure. We keep the transactions ITI 68 in order to find the patient information 101 for the translation of the codes. And then also you need to fill this new structure, which is DVC ICVP associated to the IPS according to the case, and the extended application will cover all of these cases, TC01, 02, 03, 04, and TC05, where we have the changes between 04 and 05, and we need to build this IPS. So the construction, the building process of the IPS, which are processes TC04 and TC05, we obviously need to do that from the immunization record and to structure these IPS ICVP bundle. And the difference with IPS DVC is that this one is particularly specific for the vaccinations that we have in the new list. And then with the transaction that we've used in previous years, ITI 65, we can then have the document in the ITI 65. And just like in track one, with all of these structures of IHE, I think it was related to the minimum bundle. So this is the process. This process really doesn't change. What's really going to change when compared against track one is the creation of this bundle, and it's the main contents that will change. And here it's going to be an IPS ICVP, and obviously that needs to be in the file server. So what elements is this ICVP made up of? Well, the same sections, really. We're going to have a bundle, a composition with the new definition. We're going to have the immunization, patient, and also the practitioner. And I think that practitioner here changes. In the last year, we referenced a guide, and now it makes a reference directly to the practitioner defined in the IPS guide. Okay, so the composition of the elements that we currently have. From the elements that the composition currently have, we're going to continue having the validity period, the type, the author, and that is to say an issuer, an identifier. The profile needs to be updated. Also, it's defined in the implementation guide too. The link is at the bottom. And once you have access to this presentation, you will be able to see that. As always, it's going to have the different sections. As an IPS, we have some that are mandatory. For example, the medications, allergies and problems, they are mandatory. We cannot omit them, but it gives us alternatives. For example, that we can do this with a unavailable code. So we're going to have to define these first three sections, section 0, 1, and 2, but keeping this code, and this will allow us not to use an associated resource. In the case of section 3, that's where we're going to keep the reference, and it'll be the reference to immunization, where we're going to input the reference to immunization as part of the IPS structure. So according to this, we're going to have then a composition, and the composition will have reference to immunization. In the case of immunization, where the elements will have the vaccine classification, it's the same classification that IPS has, but you will see the alternatives more extended. Also, patient reference, also the reference to the practitioner, and the profile, of course. Obviously, place, date and time where the vaccination took place. And the change is that there's a new extension. This is a product ID where we need to add these ICVP codes from this list. So we're going to have a new system which is already defined in the guide. We're also going to have the element for the code and the lot number too. So there are several things that are not included, like the manufacturing data and some additional information, because when having this code, many of those pieces of information are already linked to that code. So within the patient elements, we have the code and the country nationality, of course, with the same standard. And we also have the IPS patient profile ID number, which is in the identifier. And we also have the type of identifier, name, a gender, a date of birth, and also contact information, trying to address the case of maybe minors or
practitioner
people
y
that
esa experiencia
require like
sería
some elderly
el
or
clínico en este caso. En este caso
let's go to
sería
practitioner. We have
el,
only
eh,
there's no much of a
elemento
change
que
here.
corre
These are elements that
con el perfil.
have to do with the
Ya, por lo
profile.
tanto, esa
So
sería la nueva
that
estructura.
is the new
Internamente,
structure.
el
And
paciente se mantienen los mismos elementos,
structurally, we have the
cambian
same
algunas
elements,
estructuras.
only some
Debería
structures
verse esto
change,
similar
but this
a lo
should
que
be very, very similar
teníamos
to
anteriormente.
what we had in previous years.
Ya, obviamente voy a hacer una pausa aquí, le voy a
Okay,
mostrar
let me
cómo
stop
utilizo
here
el IPS
because I want to show you
Así que
what
voy a tratar de
IPS
compartir
looks like. Let me see.
y que ustedes puedan ver. Espero que eh, se pueda ver de manera correcta.
I hope that you can see this correctly.
Ya, voy a omitir algunos recursos
I will omit some
y
resources.
acá tenemos nuestro bundle. ¿Ya? Esta sería
And
la
this
estructura
is
del
the
bundle.
bundle. This is
Ya,
the
bueno,
bundle
nuestro
structure.
sitio,
We have
nuestro
the
IPS.
composition, the
eh,
IPS,
Obviamente todos estos
and
elementos
of
van a ir
course, so
profilados
all of these
automáticamente
elements will be
como vimos en el
profiled.
IPS.
The type is a document as the IPS
Elementos que son
states.
importantes de señalar
Some important
que
elements to highlight.
creo
Well,
que
medication with the
este se maneja
status
también
that I have mentioned.
similar o
And that's
estos son información similares, creo que
these
también
sections are
en el
very
mismo artículo.
similar.
Y estas otras secciones
And
también que
these are the
traemos
sections here which are
alergias y
medication,
esto
allergies, and
viene en la misma
problems.
estructura, ¿ya?
We keep the same
Aquí posteriormente
structure,
se
the
aplica la
same code,
referencia
and then we
hacia
can
el immunosystem,
continue
¿ya?
with the reference
Eh,
towards immunization.
Mirando este elemento
We can take a look at this element here. Let me see if I can show it to you.
Aquí está. Aquí está
Here
el
it
resource
is.
immunization, el sitio.
This is the immunization, that resource,
Podemos ver también todos los
and
elementos que
we
tiene.
can see all the
Ya,
elements that it
en
has.
ese
We can
caso,
see that it's going to make a reference to the patient, also to the performer,
y su información asociada, ¿ya?
and the related information.
Ya, eso. El paciente en este caso se mantiene de la
In
misma
this
forma.
case, the patient
Solamente estos
remains the
elementos
same. We
que
add
ven con
these elements
nacionalidad
that have to do with
y su
nationality
tipo
and also
de documento en este caso.
the
¿Ya?
type of
Voy a tratar de
document
recordar
here.
y seguimos con el
A
mismo nombre
practitioner, the
del
same thing,
documento.
only this element
Actualmente
changes. So
no representaría
it really doesn't
el,
represent much of a problem to,
el generar estos recursos. ¿Ya?
to create these
Aquí podemos ver
resources.
una
You
vez
just
que
need
ya
to
hay
pay
un
attention
archivo
to
hecho.
the additions, and you shouldn't have much
Una
of
vez
an
que
issue
ejecute ese
there.
proceso, obviamente
Once
eso
that
se tiene que
process
enviar
is ready, that needs
al
to be
servidor que
sent
salió la
to the
transacción del
server
65%.
using
Y ese es el procedimiento.
ITI65. That's the transaction. We will receive the
Ejecutado
structure
hacia el propio
and it can
servidor.
be taken to the server.
Ya, bueno, posteriormente, una vez que se tribute, se tiene que realizar
Once that is done, we need to do
internamente
the process and
este IPS
internally that IPS
irse
needs to be
un
transformed
documento que se llama perfil
into a
protocolo
structure
y
which is called
automáticamente
questionnaire
este
response,
nodo
and the internal
se reemplaza
applications of the node
por el nodo nacional
with a
ya
national
sea
code, for example,
por servicio
allows us
DCC,
to carry out
cuyo
these two
nombre es un nombre heredado
DCC services. This is a name that has been, that is
se
legacy.
encargan
And
de
also the resource
presentar esta
generation
información,
service, make the
obviamente utilizando
transformation,
ya antes tenemos la
obviously
IPS5
using the keys that you have
cargando,
uploaded into the
obviamente hacer las
system,
verificaciones
and it allows us to
y
carry out the transformation to sign and
generar
create
ese
the
elemento no
QR
debería
code.
cambiar
So that element
seguiría
should not change, and you're going to
hacía
receive the QR
el año anterior, ¿ya?
just as you
Claro,
did
las
it
estructuras internas
last year.
siempre van a cambiar,
The internal structures will
no
always
cambia
change, but this is something that we have been
el
working
sitio
on
para que sea lo más
together with
transparente
Sergio
posible.
in order to make this
Ya,
as
en
transparent as
detalle lo que se
possible.
hace es que se
In
transforma en ese
detail,
cuestionario response,
well,
ya
it's
lo recibe el
questionnaire
service,
response that receives
lo transforma en
the
alguna
service. It transforms
código
it
de error
into some logic
y
structures that you
posteriormente a
can
eso
see,
se realiza
and
la
then
generación
the creation
del QR y finalmente
of the
enviarlo
QR code
a
takes place. which is what you
ya
will
que
have
tenemos
access to.
internamente
The questionnaire
internamente
internally, I don't think that you
ese,
see this directly, but
la ICD y
if you
realizar las transacciones
wanted to have
internamente,
access and to carry out these transactions
también
internally,
darle otro uso a los
or
campos
rather
y
to
en este
make
caso
another use of the elements that are being given,
este
you
daría
can also
como
take a
una
look at
base
this
para
questionnaire, which is one
servicio.
of the bases in
Ya,
order to
lo
communicate with
lógico
the
supone
service. The
para
logical models that are
más
used since
información sobre
manufacturing has
documentos
changed, a new structure needs to be used in the QRL, the payload. In this particular case, so we have a new structure, some elements are removed, and it
el
is
código de vacuna
and the vaccination code
para
is
incluir
associated
esta nueva lista
to
de
this
campos.
new pre-qualified vaccination list.
Algunos términos que deberían ser importantes
Some
ya
terms
el
that should be
certificado,
important.
el Digital Vaccination Certificate,
The
el
digital vaccination
certificado sanitario
certificate,
digital, ya, y
we
cuando
have
hablamos
them.
del
We have them
HCP,
there. When we talk
este
about the health certificate
que ha de ser
payload,
adquirido
well, this is the internal structure that has been that has come from the European certificate, and it's a new use now. It has evolved
y nos
somewhat,
permite poder
and it allows us
la misma estructura que
to
estamos
have
viendo,
the
¿cierto?
same structure that
Especificar
we have seen and going from this large IPS to going
variables
into
con la menor
structures
cantidad de
that have
espacio posible.
variables that use the least
Ya,
amount of space
lo
possible.
que pasa es que
And in fact, so little
esta
space
información va a
that
reflejar
the information will reflect elements that the ones that you can see here. These are the elements that will be there once the information is extracted. And this is what the payload will look like. And it's going to have a vaccination section that will have this definition there in VP, we have the value set ICVP, where we have the vaccination that this system will add. But for this, we obviously need you need to have the definition and the right definition of the IPS with these codes that we're showing here on the
El
screen.
proceso de firma y validación es algo que también se
Signature and
realiza
validation. This is also
cuando
legacy. That is to say, we need to transform the structure
que se
into
necesita firmar
JSON that is
la versión
needed to be
definida
signed
y
in a
firmar
compressed
HCP
version.
para
It's
que
signed,
me
and that's what
exponga
allows us,
los datos también
with
que se
these
corresponden
compression and the creation of the QR code,
de
to have the QR code that
ser
is
validado
signed
en
and
acceso a
that
la
can
llave
be validated having access to the public keys. And
Usted
since
sabe
you have
que
access well, by
el proceso
using
de
the
selección
validators, so
igualmente
that remains the same. And
con todos los cambios y los accesos a las
with
redes
all the
tiene que
changes
ser
and access to the
verificado
global networks, this
continuamente.
is something that is
Ya,
being done
ahora
more
vamos a pasar
smoothly.
a lo que es
Now we're going to take a look at some examples and transaction of transactions at
ayudar
ITI
a si
65, and I'll
surgen
hand
otras
it
dudas.
over to Sergio if no one has any doubts.
Sí, gracias Alejandro.
Thank you,
Ya,
Alejandro.
entonces yo en esta segunda mitad de la presentación
So
voy a
in
hacer
this
como más
second half of the presentation, I'm
una
going to
demostración de cómo
give you
realizar
a demo on how to use this, and I will show you
equipos que
the
tenemos.
technical changes that we
Entonces,
have.
para eso
For
voy a
this,
empezar primero
let
con
me start then with the national node repository, which, as Alejandro has mentioned, has been
Entonces,
updated.
esta actualización que tenemos
So it was
permite
updated
entonces
recently, and
usar
here you're going to find the updated services for these type of new vaccinations certificate ICVP. And as you can see here, first in the Docker Compose, one of the important parts when you update that you need to verify is that the DDCC service, which is a legacy name as we all know, and these are the one, the resource generation service, are in version 3.0. That's the new version for this year, and you have to make sure that that's the one that you're running. Aside from these two services, the other one that is updated is the bundle signer, which is the mediator, as we call it, which has some functionalities in order to transform from IPS to these ICVP certificates. Since this is not an image of the repository, we take these directly from here. You also need to rebuild it so that you can keep that in
Con
mind.
eso listo, entonces ustedes
So
han
with
visto
that,
que
here,
la documentación está actualizada.
the
Básicamente
documents
lo que
have been
hicimos
updated here in transformation.
pusimos cómo se utiliza
we have included here how the new transformation takes place, which is very similar to what we did last year with DVC, but now we have this transformation called ICVP. You give them a bundle, and then you call the transformation, and it will carry out the whole logic behind it, behind the scenes, and will transform the IPS will create the questionnaire response that is sent to the services, and that creates the QR code, which gives you the results. So I will show you that in particular so that we can just have a short demo here on how the service actually works. So the first thing that I'm going to do, as Alejandro mentioned, I will do this through Postman though. So let me call my Fire server. We're using the same server that we have made available. So with an ITI 65 transaction that I have already prepared, we're going to create an IPS with the definition of this new implementation guide with all the details that Alejandro has mentioned. So here I am creating it, and you can see that this transaction creates all the elements that the standard states, the list, the document reference, the bundle, which is the IPS, and the patient. So you know that we can search it afterwards with the identifier using some of the other transactions, but since we have the ID here, we can go straight to it. It's 1205. So if I go to this Fire server and I request bundle 1205, you can see that it provides me with this IPS. It's the bundled document type, and it has this profile, which is the one that Alejandro was mentioning just a while ago. And here, this is the exact same example that Alejandro was showing. So I'm not going to repeat all of that, just to show you that it's the same one. And the allergy sections, conditions or problems and medications are empty. You can see that with these empty because this is data that we don't need for this IPS, but we do have one immunization, which is the one that is here, that has several pieces of data, and the most important one is this extension here. It says that it has a yellow fever immunization with this prequel code. So here we have this IPS as an example in order to test this transformation. And as I was saying, this works very similarly to the way that we did it last year, taking the IPS and here we use the mediator, which is import 3000 by default. And we call this a transformation $ICVP. So if you have the latest version of all the services that I have just mentioned, you're going to be able to execute this transformation on this IPS, and I can run it here. It takes a little bit of time, but it gives me the full result. And the result has the same previous format where we get the response, which will contain an image with the QR code that has been created for this vaccination certificate. So I can take all of this, just to continue with this example, and I could go to a software to transform this that is on a 64 base into an image. So this is a page that allows me to do that. I've just pasted that information, and right down here at the bottom, we get the QR code, which is the image that is in this base 64 string, which is the one that you can also use for exchanging information. So
código QR,
this
como
QR
mencioné,
code, as I was saying,
o muy similar al
follows the
anterior,
same structure, very similar
ustedes
to the
también
DAC.
podrían,
For example, you could, if you wanted,
aquí tengo otro,
let's see, here I
si
have,
escanea este código QR,
if you
vamos,
scan this
voy a
QR
abrir una
code,
página que me permite
let me
hacerlo.
go to another page that
Entonces,
allows me to do
si
this.
yo lo subo aquí,
If I upload it
este
here,
código QR es este
what
string
the
que
content
viene
is
siendo el
the
base
string,
45
which is the base
payload de esto,
45 of the
ya
payload.
comprimido, ¿cierto? Y con todos los
It's already been
y con los bits
compressed
que corresponden.
and it has been
Entonces,
duly signed. So
si esto, por ejemplo, ya haciendo el último paso, lo quieren ver,
if you want to, if you would like to see
aquí me
this,
parece,
I've got another page here for
aquí como
that.
pueden ver,
So as you can
el
see,
contenido de este
the
código
content
QR
of the string
y
after it has
tiene el
decoded it
nombre
and decompressed it
el mismo
is
que
this
le estábamos
payload,
hablando antes,
which is
que
the same
tiene
one
los
that I showed you
pacientes,
before that has the
tiene
patient's
el
data,
tipo de vacuna,
the
el producto, ¿cierto?
type
Para
of
que usted pueda
vaccination and the product, in this
información
case,
que viene
yellow fever,
del
and
IPS.
the information that comes
Entonces,
from the IPS.
finalmente, este es el payload
So
que
this
está
is
contenido en este
the
código QR.
payload that is
Y
part of
ya
this
después
QR
confirmando
code that we have been
con
creating and
todos
we have
los procesos.
signed with all the
Entonces,
processes. So
resumiendo un poco,
summarizing,
lo primero que tienen que hacer es
the
actualizar
first thing that you need to do is to
la
update
última
the
versión
GitHub
de los
in
servicios.
order to have the latest version of the
Los nuevos
services.
servicios
Once
tienen
you
que
have the
incluir
latest version, then you need to
IPS de
build
acuerdo
this IPS
a la guía
according to
que
the
hemos hablado
guide
Alejandro.
that Alejandro shared
Vamos a
with
empezar
us.
con
We're
disponibilizar
also going to
como
make
antes
this available,
para
this
que tengan
example
una
that we're using
referencia
available so
rápida.
that you can have it as a
Y una
reference.
vez que
And
tengan ya entonces los
once
IPS
you have
conformes
created an
y
IPS like this, and
versiones del servicio,
the
ya
the
directamente
latest
podemos
version of
empezar
the
a
service, then you're
utilizarlo
going to be able to run a test like the one that I
para
have shown you.
transformación directamente,
This
porque como comentábamos
transformation, which is the recommended way
eh,
because it's the
y
simplest.
entonces si
And
está todo bien deberían
if everything is all right,
generar
you
el código
should
QR.
be able to
Como decía
create the
Alejandro,
QR
esta
code.
parte
As
adicional
Alejandro
es
was
como
saying, this is a
referencia
part of what we
para
did
que
last year.
puedan
And if you had
utilizarlo
already
directamente
had
de
this set up,
manera
you don't need to
tradicional
do it again and to load
pero
the
ya
keys again because the
porque
same
directamente
infrastructure
con el
is used. So if that has
código
already
QR la
been
IPS
solved, which I'm assuming that most of you have already
entonces se
done it,
pueden
then
realizar
it should simply be a
código
matter of updating the
asegurar
Docker
la
and then
actualización.
executing the
Esta
transformation.
transformación igual se puede usar
This
una vez
transformation,
como
if you
desarrollador
use an
cuando les va
IPS that has a piece of
a
information
indicar
that is missing, it will let you know.
en qué
It will
parte
give you an error
del
and
elemento
it'll
van
tell you what
saltando.
elements are missing.
Así que se pueden ir guiando
So
por
you
ese
can
camino.
use that as a guide too.
Y con eso entonces pueden generar los
And then
certificados
with that, you
de
can create
vacunación
the
que van a ser necesarios para
ICVP
los
vaccination
pacientes.
certificate, which is what we're going to be using in track 2 this year.
Sí. Les aprovecho de comentar
Let me also
algo
tell
muy
you
importante
something very
que
important, and that
vamos,
is that
por ahora les mostramos cierto la guía de
we've
implementación,
shown you
vamos a
the
ver
implementation guide.
imágenes
We're going to
de algunos
share
ejemplos,
these
pero
IPS
hasta ahora no
example,
tenemos un validador
but
para
we
que
don't have a validator for this
estamos
IPS so far.
trabajando para que en
We're
Gacel cambie
working so that in Gazelle that
este
profile
nombre
can be uploaded and so that it's
para que
available
puedan
soon
entonces validar
so that
contra
you can
los
validate
documentos
against the
y
Gazelle
soporte
to make sure that the
que
IPS that you
va a
have
funcionar y van a
will
hacer esta transformación.
work and you'll be able
Pero
to
por
carry
ahora
out
no
this
hemos dado
transformation.
acceso
But in the meantime, we don't have it
tenemos
available.
principalmente ya
So you
funcionalidades de
have to
implementación
follow the
que
implementation guide
ofrece.
and the examples that will provide you with.
Sí, entonces eso era un poco de la parte técnica de la
So that's the
que queríamos mostrar.
technical part that we
Así
wanted
que
to show you.
voy a dejar de presentar y bueno, y eso es principalmente
And
resume un poco lo que vimos
that
recién ya
also
más profundamente.
summarizes the
No sé si tienes
technical
algo más
part. I don't know if
que
there's
comentar, Alejandro, si no,
anything else that you might want to say, Alejandro.
pasamos
If
a la
not,
siguiente
then
parte.
we have time for Q&A.
Sí, bueno, lo que comentabas del track 2B que se va a hacer
Yes,
ahora
track 2B,
en la
which will
siguiente
be
sesión, in la
in the
siguiente
next
sesión,
session. I believe
en
that's
realidad
what we're going to be
de la
talking
parte
about.
de desarrollo.
The
Ya.
Part B of track 2 will be
Lo que
addressed
me
in
estás
the
diciendo
next
respecto a los
session.
elementos de validación, sí,
So
eso
validation elements,
está, o está en proceso de estar disponible, así que se va a informar todos los canales
it's in the process, but we will let
para
you
que
know
se tenga ese
once
acceso
it's
directo.
ready through
Ya,
the
sí,
regular
bueno, con esto,
communication
Jorge, si hay
channels.
alguna
So
duda,
the floor is
estamos
open if we
nuevamente
have any
a su
doubts, any
servicio para
questions.
servir de lo que hemos
This is the right time if you need us to review anything or to explain anything in further depth.
Si no, Carlos, te entregamos la
And if
palabra a
not,
ti.
Carlos, then we'll hand it back to you.
No, lo mismo, si hay alguna duda, este es el momento.
Sure, if you have any doubts, this is the right time. Let me just tie some knots. Connect the dots here. All of these then has to do with track 2, which is the vaccination certificate. If you have been moving forward with track 1, you will see that in order to comply with this part of the second track, well, it's actually quite simple because it's the same IPS that can help you to get the same vaccination certificate. But we need to pay attention to the following week, how to interact from both tracks, VHL, as well as the vaccination certificate and the application, which is going to be the important part that we're going to be seeing in the Conectaton, how the patient with the application can interact with the different nodes. The elements then that are being presented today have to be very clear and hopefully have to be previously tested so that we can work correctly with the application to see how it performs from the perspective of the patient moving around. So if you have any doubts, speak now or forever hold your peace. Now, you can continue working with the monitors on track 2 related aspects in your corresponding working meetings, though. As Sergio also said, this is work that is done jointly with the team from the WHO. They own the definitions, and the validator is part of some of the things that we have been requesting. Yeah, hopefully they will have the validator within the timeframes that we require for the Connectathon. And if it were not the case, we will are going to validate that against the scheme nonetheless. I mean, we will consider that as part of the Connectathon if we do not have the validator, which we hope we will get as soon as possible. I just needed to clarify. Okay, no hands up. I'm just speaking. I'm filling up, trying to kill some time here to see if any question comes up. But it seems that no one has any doubts. Pay attention to this last part, which is important for us to close the tracks that were defined last year. And from next week, Sergio will be with us again, talking about the new things regarding the app. We're going to see the interaction with multiple nodes and the application. So those who have downloaded the app and have already started populating it with some IPS, it's very good because you're going to be fully updated for the next session. And if not, you have 1 week then to move forward and try to catch up. So the rest of this month, we're going to focus on the vaccination certificates. And the idea is that we can close it between now and the end of the month, the ICVP certificates with the scheme that Alejandro shared. And hopefully we'll also be able to have the VHL and the vaccination certificates in the application. And then we have September to close some tests for both tracks so that we can be up and running in October. Remember that the virtual Connectathon is the first week of October, and we have no chance to have further development. We have to be ready by then, and then we need to start testing. We're going to have this first testing instance, which will be enabling. And then we will see each other in the face-to-face event, interacting with the different applications. We only have a month and a half in working to fully catch up and to be in the best possible conditions for the Connect. Thank you very much, Alejandro. Thank you very much, Sergio, and everyone else who attended. And if there are any doubts, do not forget that we're going to upload this presentation, this video in the YouTube channel, and the monitors are available in the case that you have any further doubts. Thank you so much. Have a good weekend. We have a holiday here, and I think in Argentina too, so you have a long weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.